Hi there, this is Matt at State of Flux, here with the end of our journey, so to speak, through the Star Trek films, with my review of Star Trek Nemesis. And this is kind of a film franchise, at least to this point. This is the final Next Generation film that kind of ended with a great big slappy wet fart. It's not a good movie, but I do think there's a lot of good in it. Let me explain. I really like the first 30-ish minutes of this movie. 38 minutes, I think, was what I saw when I looked at the little time clock. I think work really well. Particularly the stuff with regard to the original crew. It opens with this scene that's very Star Wars prequel-y. You can tell this is a franchise just trying to catch up to Star Wars, both on this movie and Enterprise TV show. I think would have been sort of entering into its season 3 fairly soon, where they're amping up the action, and everything is just sort of reflexive decisions based on the success of Star Wars. Certainly the visual opening of this film on the Romulan planet and its architecture is very Naboo-y. But you have a really interesting and intriguing scene where a bunch of Romulans are assassinated. And like that was a banger of an opening. Following that, you are reintroduced to the mainline crew at the wedding of Riker and Troi, something they set up excellently in the previous film, and I loved that. All those scenes, Picard's little toast to them is great. I would have liked to spend a moment or two with Wesley Crusher, because he's there. I understand there is a deleted scene that is pointless to watch on the Blu-ray with him in it, but you know, if you're gonna bring him back, you have him say something. Come on, guys. And they even brought back my favorite character, Guinan. I loved that too. But this is at the precipice of change, because Picard is seeing his crew disband. And it was kind of genius having Whoopi Goldberg and Will Wheaton back, because they're two entities that have largely been gone, one since the show and one since the first movie, absent from the crew. And Picard is being confronted with the fact that he is no longer going to be working with Riker, because Riker has been issued captaincy of the Titan, something that would carry on into Picard, and we'll talk about that at the end. And he's also going to be going with Troi. So this is the last time this crew is going to be together in any kind of unity that they had before. And the first half hour really sets up this kind of emotional detailing of saying goodbye, being forced to say goodbye to your friends, your co-workers, and it's great. I really like that. And throughout the entire rest of the film, anytime we're dealing with the periphery characters of like Geordi and Riker, Troi, even Beverly Crusher has a couple of lines in this, which was a nice change of pace. And Data, I like a lot of the stuff with Data. We'll touch on that, believe me. I was on board. I liked all that stuff throughout the entire runtime of the film. But at the half-hour mark, little after the half-hour mark, we're introduced to the main villain of the film. And the main villain of this film is a man named Shinzon, I believe, played by Tom Hardy. And he is revealed to be the clone of Jean-Luc Picard. Now, I had two takeaways from this. Number one, I'm staring at Tom Hardy, and I don't know how you cast that man as Patrick Stewart's clone, The two look about as much alike as Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and Zendaya. They don't look alike. Short of them being bald at the same time and having a prominent nose, they have nothing physically or visually in common with each other. In fact, distractingly, they will have a back and forth scene, an over two shot, if you will, over the shoulder of each of them. And you'll have Tom Hardy talking with his big, full, luscious lips, and then cut to Patrick Stewart, who has no lips. He has the suggestion that lips might have once been there, but in good, firm British man style, stiff upper lip has completely, been sucked right into his face. And that was just such a perplexing decision to cast Tom Hardy and not cast the most logical person to play Patrick Stewart's clone, who would be Patrick fucking Stewart, because this is something that is a Star Trek tradition. You get doppelgangers of most of these characters. They've done Riker doppelganger episodes. They've done Captain Kirk doppelganger episodes. They've done whole mirror universe doppelganger episodes. They've done multitudinous doppelganger episodes for many, many, many characters. Why not bring that into the movie by casting Patrick Stewart as Shinzon? It would have given something interesting for Patrick Stewart to do, because he seems to be struggling with having any kind of energy in this film. And that's pretty disappointing coming off the previous three. That said, I had another epiphany while watching this, and this is going to be a hot take Sally moment on my part. But I think Tom Hardy is an undeniably gifted performer. He makes decisions every time he's acting, and he commits to them wholesale. He fully throws himself into whatever stylistic choices he has chosen for every movie. But I don't think I like Tom Hardy really often or ever. He's given good performances, but I'm never excited when I see him on screen. As I should be. Apparently, everybody loves Tom Hardy. And I realized that, no, I like Mad Max, but Fury Road, but I don't like it because of him. I like kind of what he was doing with Bane, but I also don't think I would have cast him as Bane. And also, I often make fun of the Bane voice from Dark Knight Rises more than I celebrate it. And maybe it's just that I've been venomed too much, because Venom, I think, was the worst movie of 2018, and Venom: Let There Be Carnage was my pick for worst film of 2021. That one I can say with absolute confidence is true. And that was a stacked year for shitty movies. That was the same year as Tom and Jerry, Space Jam: A New Legacy, Zack Snyder's Justice League, and Army of the Dead. But no, I went with Venom: Let There Be Carnage as the worst picture that year. So maybe it's the whole, Venom sickness. I've been venomed a little too much by Tom Hardy, but I don't really like him. He's been in movies I've liked, like Bronson and stuff like that, but even that I'm not boy, a Tom Hardy movie, I'm there. He's got that, Bike Riders movie coming out in June, and I'm I guess I'll see it, because I'm sure it'll be an Oscar contender or whatever, but I'm not terrible excited. So I had that epiphany while watching this movie, that I just don't know that I like Tom Hardy. Feel free to hurl things at me now. I'll take it. I mentioned that to a couple coworkers, and they did spit venom at me, figuratively. But yeah, Star Trek Nemesis falls apart in its villainy. I don't think any of that storyline is written particularly well, and it's not acted convincingly on Tom Hardy's part. He does nothing to suggest to us that he is even remotely Picard-like. So much so that I feel like you could lift that storyline out of the film, and it might be a cleaner movie because of it. The only issue with that is you lose the idea that a person is a person based on experience, not based on who they are genetically linked to or who they are at birth. And that's a sentiment that I really like, and I will say that this has going for it, because they do land that insanely well with the data and before of it all. And I do like the symmetry that they're painting with data and before and lore before him, as well as they were doing with Picard and Shinzon. Boy, I hope I have that name right. I watched that movie a couple days ago, and I'm just like, am I saying that name right? The clone Picard. So yeah, I like the idea, the notion put forth with that whole concept. And you would lose the execution of that, or even the inclusion of that, by not having him be Picard's clone. But I just don't believe that's Picard in any way. The writing doesn't do anything to sell us that he is a clone. The makeup, the acting, the choices, nothing is there to suggest that and make that work. And I think that's what deflates the movie a lot more than anything else. And without that aspect of the film, why you really can't lift it out is because what are you saying after that? This is just a villain he encounters, and they don't really know how to end it, but they want a big dramatic moment, so let's just lift the ending of Wrath of Khan and apply it to this. And this is the film that famously killed Data. And that was one thing that I actually kind of liked. And it's not because I've never been a Data fan. I think I've been open about that. It's not that. I did feel his death was kind of earned here. And what earns it is the final scene that B4 has, where they try to share a moment with B4, and he's just not Data. But you can see how maybe someday he could grow into that by singing the song referencing the very first time we ever met Data. And I like that this is one of the installments of the films that actually acknowledge the show, more so than I think any of the other movies that came before it. Sure, Star Trek First Contact obviously referenced Best of Both Worlds, but it seemed to forget every other encounter they ever had with the Borg, shy of that one experience. This is referencing a lot of little bits of the show, including the first time Riker meets Data, including having Janeway show up in this movie, which was really cool. I always liked Janeway. They didn't always utilize her well, and maybe I will do a forthcoming video about Voyager sometime in the near distance. Yeah, so we'll talk about that some other time. But I like that this was inclusive of the show. That was kind of neat. So, yeah, it's not a good movie. I don't think it's quite as bad as everybody else kind of made it seem. My relationship with this one is a little interesting in that I've told the story many times now of my introduction to Star Trek. It was through the motion picture. I almost didn't continue watching the series, but after being talked into it from my dad to watch Wrath of Khan, I ended up renting Wrath of Khan through Generations, and then afterwards I rented Generations Insurrection. And this one was the only other movie out at the time. When this was still on the new release wall at the video store when I did rent it. So I had zero hype from this movie because I hadn't really heard much about it. I didn't even really know what the reviews were because when the film came out, I didn't care. So I didn't know what the general thought process of this film was. And I watched it, and the first time I saw it, I loved this movie. I was way, way into it, and I was like just so emboldened by the big dramatic take they had done by killing Data, but also not necessarily killing Data like we have before, and that could be a relationship that blossoms and whatnot. I think the only negative thing at the time that I said about the film was the weird rapey sex scene with Riker and Troi, which I stand is the worst moment in any Star Trek movie. Full stop. Why the fuck is it that in this episode or in this installment, this movie? That is completely pointless. It's regressive to the character. I mean, it's on point with the TV show. Like, we hyper over sexualized Deanna Troi far too much, and there were so many moments within the series where she is taken advantage of by other alien species or male characters in general, and it's something that's taken me. But why did we carry that into the movies? Like, why? It's so bad. It's a pointless scene, and every time I get to it, I skip a chapter to the next part because I don't like it at all. That was my only criticism of the movie the first time I saw it. Generally speaking, I liked it. However, I tried to rewatching it again after I'd physically purchased all the movies and watch them in quick succession, and it didn't move me like it did that previous time. And I've never truly like hated the movie, but I started to kind of get so bored by it whenever it was telling Picard's story. And that's really weird. He's the main character, and he's compelling as hell in the previous, like, 2-3 movies, not to mention the entire TV show. So why here does it just fall flat? And I think it's just poorly written. Long and short of it, that's what it is. And it's poorly written to the point where Patrick Stewart just didn't seem to have the energy to try and elevate what was there, even. By this point, he was an X-Men, and he seemed to be more invested in those, even the less good ones that he was in. I never got that feeling that he was not invested in what he was making until this installment of Star Trek, and that's kind of disappointing. So, yeah, its legacy didn't live on very well. I already briefly talked about how Star Wars seemed to impact it. There's quite a bit of action, and I will say some of the suspenseful scenes really do play well, but this has a different tone to it than any of the other Star Trek movies, where it is trying to be a little more mature. It's trying to both engage the Star Trek audience intellectually, the Star Wars audience stylistically, but it's also trying to be more tense and brooding and violent to try and mirror what was probably on television at the time, or maybe some other movies like Born and stuff like that were beginning to come out, and you were seeing a pivot into that style of action and moody filmmaking. And it's strange, if you watched the original 10 Star Trek movies and want to see what seems the most like what JJ ended up doing with Star Trek 2009, this is kind of it. But he took the qualities that kind of worked best and amplified them for Star Trek 2009. This seems like a bad first step towards that direction. But there is a lot of like elements borrowed, consciously or not, from this that make their way into Star Trek 09. And it's a movie that I'm not even convinced J.J. Abrams saw. He's openly said he's not a huge Star Trek fan. I don't know that he watched the previous movies that were like next gen, that weren't directly related to the characters he was making a series for. But yeah, I have talked about Nemesis quite a bit now. I'm not a fan, but I like some of the bold choices it made. I give the movie... It probably doesn't deserve it, but I'll give it 2 stars because I really like the stuff with the periphery characters, like a lot. And it has Ron Perlman. Anytime Ron Perlman's there, you get excited. He's under heavy makeup. That's another thing. Both this and Enterprise, not only were they addressing the Star Wars of it all at the time, but you can tell Galaxy Quest had come out, and they were like, man, we need to up our game, because the Xindi in Enterprise look very much like Sirtis does in Galaxy Quest, and the villains that are behind Shinzen, one of which is played by Ron Perlman, also look very kind of Galaxy Questy. So there you have it. But the one thing I am grateful for is because this movie made bold decisions, there was an interesting place for the character of Picard, and really all the characters, to go moving forward. And we will address that in 2 to 3 weeks' time when I talk to you about Star Trek Picard Season 1. This brings us full circle. I started reviewing these once more after watching Star Trek Picard Season 3. And watching 1, 2, 3 in quick succession, I did a full series review or whatever. Now I'm going to break them down by their individual seasons and sort of reassess my thoughts watching them a second time. But a lot of the best elements at play in the first season of Picard are directly a result of this movie. So it is important to its canon. It's not something they completely ignored like Star Trek V or something like that, or even Star Trek The Motion Picture. This is something that is acknowledged within the canon and really helped shape the trajectory these characters would go, for better or worse. We'll get there in a couple weeks' time. But next week, you are going to get my entire list of the Star Trek movies. I'm going to give you my ranking of the Star Trek movies. So stay tuned for that next week, and a couple weeks down the road from that, we will review Star Trek Picard Season 1. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, do all that good stuff. Peace.